Okay, today I wanted to talk about a new manga story that I've been reading, Delicious in Dungeon, or I think it's called Dungeon Meshi. I think that's the original Japanese for it. But I've been reading it. I've been really enjoying it, so I just kind of wanted to talk about it. There's a few things that I wanted to start off with. Is that it kind of gives off. I don't know if this is the official genre that it's attributed to it, but it very much gives off at least in the beginning section, a slice of life of sorts. Now, I would say it kind of breaks this because there's not really much of a routine. It's kind of like pretty linear. You know, they're starting at the beginning of the dungeon and they're headed towards the end of the dungeon, basically. So I feel like one of the, maybe not the requirement, but one of the big aspects of slice of life is just this routine aspect where you kind of do a bunch of stuff daily, end of day, and then kind of, it's very much just this continual cycle, which is what adds kind of a nice comfort feeling to it. So there's no routine. However, but the reason why I would kind of say it is because the way I generally view slice of life is that it's kind of mellow. So basically, we've got highs and then we've got lows, basically. And this usually, what I would refer to this as is in regards to like drama, danger, anything like that. So there's big wins, big losses. Usually it's the tension, basically big wins, big losses, more or less for it. So usually this is how highs and lows, and I would say slices of life are kind of like this, more or less. It's pretty balanced. And then you take another story and it's kind of like this, and it kind of goes around like this and bounce up and down and up and down like that. Because the reason I usually kind of make the distinction is that it kind of goes between what are the characters trying to accomplish, basically. So if you have in our slice of life one here, let's say we're going to make a good cup of coffee, basically. This is a slice of life goal, basically, for an episode or for a chapter or something like that. Let's see. We're trying to make a good cup of coffee. What happens if we fail? We make a bad cup of coffee. Not that much. Over, on this one, basically this section of this, where it's low and high. And basically when I say it's dangers in terms of maybe it's the extreme of the outcome, it's either really good or really bad. Really good, really bad. So this one is, let's see, save father from cancer, right? So this is, he's potentially going to die. He's living. He's fine, basically. These are the two options, And when you're presented with these two different options, this presents a wildly different, wildly different outcome for the story, basically, for it, as opposed to good cup of coffee. What's the bad part of a good cup of coffee is that you make a bad cup of coffee, and that's really all that there is to it. And it's just the stakes basically are not that great. And I think there's definitely other aspects, but I think that is kind of what is the heart of slice of life, basically, is that this is kind of muted more or less for it. It's much more of a mellow. This is how I view it. So it's like I'm trying to think, Arya, Yatsuba, I can never, it's YKK, it's that one. It's the Yokohama Kidashi Kikau one, basically. But kind of all their goals for the day or something like that is really simple. Like, I'm going to go get gas. And you go and you see a beautiful scene in nature, and that's it. And it's just it's all about just taking in the moment, basically. It's kind of just like breathing, kind of like meditative, just breathing. Which I really love. I really enjoy. That's the reason why I really enjoyed those. Actually, except for Arya, I just haven't ever seen Arya before, but the others I really enjoyed. And the other one that the author who did Yokohama did another one about where the guy flies around in planes. It was pretty good, but the art was just beautiful, as always. Either way, but basically it's this dynamic of big win, big loss, basically, and that's kind of what we're going with. This is where Naruto goes. He's fighting against Pain or Orochimaru or something like that, and we defeat the most evil guy in the world, or the most evil guy defeats us and kills everyone. It's like these are your two outcomes for a story, and these would provide, you know, the huge tension for the story and everything. And it's good. That's what you want, because that's what, again, it just depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell. So Delicious in Dungeon kind of does it where does feel it's kind of muted. It's maybe not as muted as some of them, but it's kind of like in the middle, basically, where they're going in, you know, they're fighting against monsters, they're going against that, you know, fighting slimes. But I never really feel that they're like in that much danger. One, I would say that they are fairly competent. They're competent characters, and this is not to say that someone like you know, Naruto or people who struggle are incompetent. It's just they're more competent than they could be, or something like that. I'm trying to think. Yeah, Naruto constantly has this knowledge gap. He always is starting off down here, basically. If this is the medium of knowledge, Naruto always starts down here, and the story is about this, and then this, basically. And then this is an arc, more or less. He starts here, this is the training arc, and then the next one resets, and it either resets like this, to where it's always relative, you know, or it just resets and it's back down here, more or less, and he's fighting to get up here again, you know. And up here being in terms of, you could think of this in terms of doing, you know, Shadow Clone Jutsu, Rasengan, Sage Mode, any of these, like, basically quote-unquote level ups, more or less, for the character. He's doing this. Now, you might say, why is it all about fighting for Naruto? Well, because that's just what the story's about. The story places a huge importance on fighting, basically. It is a fighting story. If it's about fighting and skill, and that's what it's about, basically. There's not really a whole lot of emphasis placed on anything else in the story. So that's the reason why we, the audience, measure this level up. We measure this level up based on fighting, because the story places this emphasis on the fighting. Now, the reason why I think this works as well is because while it is a lot of fighting, and they're in a dungeon, of course, the premise of the story is that there's this mad wizard, basically, who has this city, and the city sinks into the ground, basically, and more or less becomes a dungeon, and there's gold and treasure, basically, down there. And so all the adventurers are going down there to go find the treasure, basically. And so it just plays out like a classic dungeon. There's traps, there's monsters, there's ghosts, and you have all the kind of the usual assortment of magic, kind of D&D, very D&D style. D&D style classes, magic, basically, and rules, more or less. A lot of rules that kind of follow the same thread of it. There's some variance and break into it, but the difference, I think, with this one is there's the emphasis on the fighting, of course. We got to fight the monsters, but then quickly on, two of the main characters, I think Laios and Seshi, who's a dwarf, they really want to cook the monsters. So they find about how all the different ways to cook the monsters, and that kind of becomes more or less the main plot. I would say not the goal. I would say the stated goal is to rescue the sister, basically. Farlin? I actually don't remember her name. Let me figure out what it was. Call her Fallon. Fallon? Maybe it's Fallon. Farlin? Whatever. The sister. We're just going to call her sister. We got to rescue the sister. That's the goal. But then what actually the story spends time on is cooking and fighting. And it's kind of a split of about 50-50 of a sense. And it kind of makes sense because obviously when you're fighting monsters, you have to kill them and then they eat them, basically. And this is like, they eat slimes, they eat fish, they eat giant bats. They kind of eat kind of weird and bizarre stuff, but then it cooks it. And so where there's the story basically then sets the focus, more or less, is kind of on cooking and fighting, and it's kind of split between it. So that way we're not constantly measuring all the characters based on this. You know, if you take Naruto and put him in a cooking show, he's going to be terrible at it generally. But then even if this is even after Naruto's like level 9,000, you know, Sage Mode, all this different stuff, basically. He basically starts off at level 1 if you change the environment, basically. And all that is to point out is the story details how we measure how strong the characters are, because the story dictates what matters. What is the way the audience should judge people based on this? So we're judging them based on cooking and fighting. This is kind of the balance between it. So it adds this kind of the fighting is just not the all important aspect of it. So people aren't constantly obsessed with more or less their fighting level, basically. That is important and probably will come into play later on in the story. But for right now, at least for the first, I think I'm like 50 chapters in, I think. I would say definitely true for like the first 30 to 40, and then it seems to kind of switch a little bit to more emphasis towards fighting and the adventure aspect of it. But very much kind of the point is, let's figure out how to defeat this monster and then cook it. And honestly, the emphasis is a bit more, let's figure out how to cook this monster. And in that, we'll defeat it, by the way. So there's this kind of this after effect for it. And so this kind of sets a different tone for the story. It places a different emphasis on it. So there's not this crazy desire for strength. And basically, if it's all about fighting, the way you make fighting really interesting is you have this, this aspect of it. You have big win, big loss. You're fighting against a guy and they're fighting against you. And, these big moments where they almost kill you, you almost kill them. With cooking, it's how do we make this delicious? It's just different dynamics. Oftentimes you can add a combat element to cooking, where it's competitive cooking. But this one, of course, they're not really cooking against anyone else or anything like that. They're just cooking to eat it and enjoy it, basically. That's all there is to it. They get... Let's do a bowl of food. There's the garnish. I was trying to draw a spoon, but I think I messed up, so... There we go. There's our bowl. Perfect. So there's this emphasis on the cooking that really adds. And I think this is what helps balance out this high and low metric, is basically that you're fighting the monster, but then the emphasis kind of is also equally split between, fighting versus cooking, more or less, for it. So it's like are we going to kill the monster? Yeah, now we have to figure out how to eat it, and then we eat the monster. So it's just the emphasis in the story is placed on the cooking, which means that we as the audience in turn measure what level the characters are based on what the emphasis of the story. So it's not necessarily, we are not necessarily pointing the finger strongly at each individual character saying, how strong are you? How strong are you? What do you offer? Basically, as far as fighting strength, this is kind of where I keep mentioning him, but this is a classic example. Krillin is probably really great at many different things. However, he's not a Saiyan. He cannot go Super Saiyan. So basically from Dragon Ball, anything after Dragon Ball, of course, but especially in Dragon Ball Z and anything on, he's more or less, he's completely useless, basically. He's just kind of there to fight some side characters or team up with a bunch of weaker characters to then get defeated, so then they can prove how strong this other guy is for then Goku or Gohan or Vegeta or Goten or someone like that to go fight him so that they can actually do something good. Basically, he's just completely useless. But the reason is because Dragon Ball Z is completely all about fighting, basically. It starts off not being all about the fighting. It starts off as a quasi, kind of like an adventure one. Kind of like how Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't start off to be about Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. It was just kind of about games in general, but then the Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards kind of exploded, so then it just became about that. But it's all about fighting. This is the only metric that we measure people by. So you are only measured by fighting. Basically, fighting, and specifically fighting ability for it. And of course, once it becomes true that Krillin is no longer a good fighter, he just becomes a useless character. But by doing this, where it's about cooking and fighting, there's this kind of split aspect of it. You can kind of have different values of the characters. You can have Seshi, who is the dwarf who has he's a great cook and great knowledge. He seems like an okay fighter, but it's not really pointed out that he's like amazing or anything like that. He's just pretty much like an okay fighter, and that's his thing. But the story works, and it really it doesn't really come into play too much for it, because it's like, listen, he's just here to do the cooking part. That's his emphasis, and he's really good at it. So basically, you go through this. I went through this part thinking that Seshi was one of like the top tier characters. You know, if this is now we're converting this is a level graph. Maybe like Marceline is like down here because she's really good at magic, but she doesn't quite get the whole cooking thing basically. So we're gonna put her down there, and let's see, Marceline. I think I spelled it wrong. Yeah, it's Marcel. Marcel? Oh, whoop! I said Marceline. I want to say it was Marceline in the other translation. Maybe it was Marcel. That's fine. Marcel, the elf wizard lady. Because while she's probably the strongest member of the party, just because she's a wizard and she can, you know, instant obliterate people. That's just how it works. But yeah, this kind of all contributes and adds to this whole slice of life aspect for it. And this is how it kind of it just adds to it. I really like this specific point that the story does, where it just places this balanced emphasis on the cooking. So basically, you can have all this kind of like fancy meals and stuff like that, and they can place this whole emphasis on the cooking aspect. And what it does is it allows the story to focus on the other things other than combat. You know, basically it allows you to have characters that are a little bit, you know, their whole worth isn't measured based simply on their combat ability, basically, because then they can. We'll draw some bubbles. I'm getting distracted here. They can just, you can have characters that have different strengths, and it makes sense for that. Now, the other thing that it does, the story does in this, is that it does. There's not a clear level system. This is something that always really annoys me about, we'll say Naruto especially, because they do the whole ninja thing. But when you sneak up on a character and they don't know you're coming, you should be able to ambush them. This is the ambush rule. We'll call this the ambush rule. If you ambush someone, they should be ambushed, more or less. But the problem with Naruto is we are completely surrounded. Your movements are completely predicted, but because I'm strong enough, it just doesn't matter, basically. And I don't really care for this, because basically what it seems like is like, you know, let's say we're equal level. So let's say, you know, I'm level 1, you're level 1. Now we're going to fight each other. And whoever wins is, maybe I'm like 1.01 and you're 0.02, basically. We'll add this as a qualifier. So then this person wins. They are the winner. But then let's say that this person, same combat thing, ambushes this person. Now they win. Now this person wins, because they're doing the ambush thing. They're basically ambushing, you know, because they got them by surprise. But then they always do this thing where it's like, there's Super Monster. We'll call him Super Monster X right here. And then all the other characters are around here. They're all these little cubes. And they do an ambush attack. And they plan this whole attack out. And they do an ambush. And then he's like, I'm too high level. It doesn't matter. And it's just bam. And it kind of always annoys me, because then it gives the audience this feeling that there's no way for them to really get the drop on. Because I don't know, if you're fighting and you can't ambush somebody who's stronger than you, or outnumber them, I don't really know what your other options are, other than just level up. With Naruto, that's just kind of how it works, basically. This is the reason why the training arc is such a constant, basically, aspect of it, is because you have this, where this is, what's he, Zabuza? I think that's Zabuza, and Naruto's got to train and get this, and then we're going to go up here. And then the next one is, we'll say the Chunin, I think it was the Chunin exams. And Naruto's got to level up here, and go up here. And then maybe this is his, fight with, was it Renji? I want to say, Renji fight. Renji, the Byakugan guy fight. And basically, each of these boxes is the arc. So this is the relative strength of Naruto and the measure of progress. Again, we want to see Naruto progress. And this is how the story works. Basically, it's this continual up and 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 up thing. And basically, then eventually there's, Orochimaru. Orochimaru up here, and he's just up here, basically. So the only way you can really fight him for this Naruto to fight Orochimaru, who's up here, is you just have to level up. Like, you just have to level. There's no amount of sneaking, trickery, anything like that. Skill, intelligence, plan. I figured out the weakness. None of that matters. Zero matters. It's literally all just level. But again, this is because the emphasis is placed on it. So with this story, the thing that I liked about it is their ambushes work. They ambush people, they sneak up on monsters, they figure out the secret or something like that. They ambush and they sneak up and get them, and it works. And that's all you need to have in a story. You need to don't violate the ambush rule. This is something that Hunter x Hunter did really well, that I just liked. They ambush a character, they kidnap the boss. There is a loss, there is an aspect of it, but they ambush him, and they get ambushed because they're like, hey, the Phantom Millennium Thieves, whatever they were called, I think it was Kurapika? I cannot think of that guy's name. It's not Killua, the other guy, the chain guy, basically, more or less for it. Who had like the cross, I think it was the crosses, but yeah, he made that like super deal so he could like lock people in place with his chains because he was the eyeball character in this one where he had the weird crimson eyes, basically. Something like that. So, and it just worked. The ambush worked. Despite the fact that they were going after supervillain boss guy, it worked. And the story allowed for it, and it built around it, where it's like, okay, so if you allow the main character to kidnap the main villain, what happens next? Okay, well, maybe they kidnap some other characters. I think that's actually what happens. It's been a hot minute since I went through Hunter x Hunter, but there's this whole aspect of this is what's going on for, and so yeah, so this is just kind of what I wanted to talk about today and kind of cover in a little bit of detail. So appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you learned something. And I'll see you in the next one.